All right, so we're on recording, and I didn't. The first part of today is brief because I do want to do the lymphatics because they're on the next exam, and then we have to start putting some ideas together as to when to have this exam before the exam and the next practical before leaving. Last practical is easy; it's the last day of lab. And the final exam is already scheduled, but we need to figure out when exam 3 is because effectively we've, other than the list lymphatic stuff, we've covered it. Suggestions? What's your exam schedule looking like in November, all of you lucky people? Nobody has a clue.
I think all the tests are this week.
Oh, good. So let's say, so in November, it has to be one of these 2 weeks. You can do the practical on the 6th or the 13th, your call. Make it the 13th? Sure, done. All done and through. So, one practical on the 13th. What? I'm so happy. I'm ecstatic. And the exam, when do you want to have it? You can either have it the 15th or, heaven forbid, the 17th or the 8th or the 10th. 15th.
What?
Anybody object to the 15th?
Wait, we have a practical on the 13th and then the lecture exam on the 15th?
Yes.
No, that's crap.
It's the same stuff.
Change that.
Oh, really? Well, this is it.
Okay, so once again, I'm going to bring it up that everybody failed this test last year, so you gave it as a take home. Why don't we just do it as a take home?
Because we're not doing it that way because you need to be better. And based on your last exam, you really need work.
Okay, give it a take home and make it a take home.
What was our?
I'll make you.
Oh, you don't want to know. So far, the average, you want to know what the average was? 55%. And you think, yeah, you can't, that deters me from having a take home.
But that was the exact reason last year why you had to take home.
Yeah, but I'm not thinking about it. Not this time. I think I need to see some performance. Yeah, and the take home, yeah, it's shared. Right now we're looking 13th and 15th unless I can be persuaded. Nice talking with all of you. You know what they say, go big or go gnome.
I think the reason we failed the last test is because you didn't wear your pink.
I'll wear it for the test.
No, I don't care.
I was going to give it to Hannah, but it would be like 4 sizes too big. Like your shirt, like your sweater, whatever your top. Which thing? All right, I digress. So nobody likes me anymore, and that's fine. It's even preferable. So, without any further ado, we're looking at very ever so. Oh, that's hard. Hold on 1 second. Okay. Let me just respond to this. We'll see what he says about that. All right. So this is a part we didn't cover. It's and I because it's really not much of an anatomical system. But I saw it was on the exam, so I think we might as well take a look. And it's relatively brief. This is the auxiliary system for returning fluid to the heart, and it's called the lymphatic system. It goes along with the venous system, But unlike arteries and veins, which are, start at the heart, end at the heart, these start at the capillary level with little openings that are designed for larger, heavier fluids. So that's where it's a distinct difference from what we're looking at with regard to veins themselves. And effectively, the way I look at it is fluids, fatty materials, heavier proteinaceous materials, waste products that would clog up capillaries have to have a way back. That's where the lymphatics come in. Unfortunately, what comes along with that are bad guys, because frequently microorganisms travel in this system. So they are somewhat the structural basis for the immune system. And what we do as the lymph is making its way back to the main circulation, it undergoes processing at lymph nodes, which you and I call erroneously swollen glands when they're inflamed. But they're not just limited to the head and neck areas, certainly. So in addition, the anatomical structures are the spleen, thymus, tonsils, mostly the lymph nodes, and some other lymphatic tissues that you'll see. Lest you refer to the fluid as the lymph, and the lymph nodes basically siphon it through. So lymph nodes, as you see, are pretty interesting. So interstitial fluid, leached plasma proteins, heavier, thicker stuff. Elaborate network, we move a fair amount. That's better than almost a gallon, 3/4 of a gallon a day. And once it enters into those lymphatics, we call it, technically speaking, lymph. One way, only going to the heart, and there's valves. And that's really the nuance about it. So they're blind-ended vessels that weave their way, interestingly, between tissue cells and a variety of capillaries. And we don't see them in a few areas that are, relatively speaking, not that consequential. We think now perhaps there are some meningeal aspects of it. I don't think it's a big deal. So they're a lot more permeable. They can pick up larger molecules. And this is the big problem: pathogens and disease cells. So the lymphatics are a really interesting area, and sometimes the first sign we see of infection and the first time we see of cancer. And unfortunately, with cancer cells, they aren't responded to with a great deal of inflammatory change. So best issue of that is a very famous fellow from here, as a hockey player, one Mario Lemieux, who early in the 1993 season, with a family history of Hodgkin's lymphoma, one of the trainers was looking, he says, "What's up? Anything new?" And he goes, "Yeah, I got a bump here. It doesn't hurt at all." And the trainer, on his game, said, "Okay, let's get somebody to take a look at it." And they looked at it and they biopsied it, and sure thing, Hodgkin's lymphoma, early onset. And again, with the family history, maybe the trainer knew that. So what they do, I'm going to kill you. Don't have children. How many times have I said that? I'm trying to get my son to help us finish some deck repair stuff. But of course, he has to be on call this week. Don't have children. Okay? And so with Lemieux, they found it early, treated him early, radiation mostly. He came back to play very efficiently at the end of that season. That was the best Penguins team of that era, of the Lemieux era, which ended in, it was 1992-93. And unfortunately, in the seventh game, they let in a goal in the second round to the Islanders and didn't proceed, because we were looking for 3 Stanley Cups in a row. Just saying, but I digress. So this is one of the things, and we were always looking at lymph. First thing you think of if you're a physician, a physician's assistant, someone in healthcare, when you see somebody with an infection, the next thing in your mind should be, let me check those lymph nodes. This is in their hand, I'm going to check by their elbow, I'm going to check the axilla. This is where if it's in the lower extremity, you're looking at the groin, upper respiratory, you're looking here. Very, very important. And so it's a good illustration how they are intertwined here. And effectively, as you can see, and this summarizes it, on its way back to the heart, when you have multiple entries and limited exits, effectively, it's like a funnel, if you want to think of it that way. You have a lot of stuff entering, and what it does and the word I use is it kind of percolates its way through. It comes through and filters its way through a series of nooks and crannies being processed and interacted with white blood cells to determine whether or not there are any impurities, pathogens, invaders, transplanted, transfused cancerous cells. They have mini valves, and and it's interesting, once fluid starts to go in them, it actually opens them up more. Okay. And so once the fluid is taken in, then the valves close or induce the valves, what they call these mini valves. And the good thing is that the lymph now is in the system where it's supposed to be. The lacteals you will see in the next unit we're doing, which is digestive, and in what are called microvilli, or what are called villi rather, which are throughout the small intestine. They add to this immense amount of surface area in the small intestine. They're fascinating. And around each of these finger-like structures, which is covered all over in cells, and all of those cells have microvilli to increase surface area. The villus, that single finger-like projection, has a lymphatic structure called a lacteal surrounded by a capillary bed. And eventually, when we'll get into what's going on here. So here are the mini valves, a good illustration. And all of these capillaries drain into a variety. And we always use the term drain on vessels in lymph or in veins. So they collect it and they carry their way in through a variety of structures. So they're similar to veins, but the walls are thinner and they have more valves, a lot more anastomoses. Okay. In the skin, with the veins that are, you might recall, the superficial vein, the deep vessels travels more so along the arteries. A little nuance, not a big deal. A variety of trunks in different regions. You don't have to worry about that. The reality is here. The right arm, right upper extremity, right side of the head and neck, and right side of the chest drain to one structure called the right lymphatic duct. Everything else to the thoracic duct, okay? And it's enlargement of something in the intra-abdominal area or in proximity called the cisterna chyli. Cistern, again, is a term for a well. Originally, that's where its derivation. When we get to muscles, you'll hear about something called terminal cisternae that are part of the intricate muscular anatomy. That's part of the way that muscles fire and contract. And chyle is the name for the lymph. Okay, in the old days, we gave special names to the products in the lymph, chyle, and all the digestive stuff, once it passed through your stomach, is called chyme, chyme. So you have, and we used to refer to chyme and chyle in the old days. They had interesting names for fluids or humors. I love that. So each empties lymph into the venous circulation, typically at the junction of the internal jugular and subclavian veins on its own side of the body. They actually form something called brachiocephalic veins. And those brachiocephalic veins join to form, you guessed it, the superior vena cava. You're also unexcited about this. That's, hey, if you're having trouble with anatomy, physiology is. Yes, dear.
That's so much negativity.
I'm just telling you, I'm not negative at all. I'm positive. I'm enthusiastic. I'm excited. But giving you easy stuff to do, it does not serve you down the road. It's not. It's not going to make you get where you're going, wherever you're planning on going for most of you. That's bad. You know, people who perspire more in practice bleed less in battle. It's very true. It's SEALs type of stuff. Okay. That's why they practice. So when it actually comes there, that muscle memory takes over. So each empties lymph at those areas. Here they are, simple schematic. So roughly, you're going to see like down here, you can see the cisterna chyli, and it comes up, and effectively this long strand is kind of the thoracic duct. and the right lymphatic duct will be over. Here's the left side. This will be over on the right side. So there's not a whole lot to say. But the drainage is important. But look at the concentration of the nodes. Head and neck area, axillary area, inguinal area, where they are. So if you've ever seen somebody, in the old days used to call it blood poisoning, but the reality was it wasn't in the bloodstream because you couldn't see it there. They get a red line coming up their arm, and it's scary. So they called it blood poisoning, but the reality of it was lymphangitis. Painful red lines under the skin, inflammation of the larger vessels, and what are called vasovasorum. You might remember that those are vessels that supply other vessels. Low pressure system, muscle activity, just like the veins, breathing, valves for backflow, arteries pulsating, contraction of smooth muscles play a role. Physical activity is important. So it, to some extent, when we immobilize an area early on, it holds the inflammatory material there. But down the road, we want more activity to pump that out of it. Swollen area, swelling is tough to deal with. For any of you in athletics or sports, it's one of the really difficult things long term. There's different kinds of edema. When we, in the heart, when we do the physiology, when we look at heart failure, particularly on the right side, fluid escapes from the vessels on gravity more so than anything else in the lower extremity. And so it becomes what we call fluid or pitting edema, which means you can put your thumb in it and walk away for a while, and you really gauge how severe it is by how long it takes to fill back up. They have lymphedema is non-pitting edema, and that either comes from edema that's there for so long that the proteins start to solidify, or it has to do with faults in the lymphatic system, some of which are hereditary, some are disease. The most notorious, bizarre disease is called elephantiasis, which is where that particular pathogen, that parasite lodges particularly in the lymphatics in the inguinal area, and they end up with a leg that looks like an elephant's leg. So you can look at bizarre pictures of those. We do see a lot of problems with tumors. We particularly see problems post-cancer. The most notorious area for that is post-breast cancer. So the very wonderful Academy Award-winning actress, older now, Kathy Bates. Great role, and if you haven't seen the movie Misery with James Caan, fabulous. And she was a new actress and won an Academy Award early from the Stephen King novel. And she had, and I've seen a variety of, she's very public about it. When she had breast cancer and a breast removed, they did an elaborate lymph. Her arm just filled up like crazy. Like 6 days a week, she's going in to get that fluid squeezed out and putting a sleeve on it just so she can go back to work and in the acting business. That was there. So there's not a whole lot to say. We're not going to talk about the cells. That's physiology. This is kind of what it likes. It's filled with what's called, you might remember, reticular connective tissue. That's the sieve-like tissue. Proliferation sites for lymphocytes that are there. Okay, lots and lots of it that are there. And there's a large amount almost everywhere. We have a certain amount of lymphatic tissue because it's designed to deal with disease and infection. The accumulations that are solid are the nodules, okay? And that's where, when we get into the physiology of the lymph system and of your immune system, we look at proliferation of B cells and activation of T cells. And there's lots of different ones. In the gut, we'll talk about Peyer's patches shortly. And certainly the most famous of those is the appendix, okay, which is known as the vermiform because it looks like a little worm, VERMIFORM, appendix. And really, classical theory now is that it was something that people removed rather quickly and often erroneously. It certainly needs to be removed if it becomes infected. And when they're red and hot, they're scary, grossly inflamed they appear. But they're useful tissue because when somebody has like diarrhea or colitis, you need something to reseed the gut with bacteria. It's like people do. It's like why you take probiotics for a lot of things, to really keep your gut bacteria, because gut bacteria are relatively easy to kill, particularly with strong antibiotics. It's one of the reasons we see something like C. diff. You didn't go into that in micro, did you? Thank goodness. It comes from overutilization of broad spectrum antibiotics. And so you have to address that right away. Take an antibiotic like Augmentin, very common prescription. The problem is, inevitably, people get diarrhea. So I would always routinely have people doing probiotics, take it with yogurt, just plain yogurt. Spaceballs, the movie. Yogurt, probiotic, acidophilus products, whatever. Love that stuff. You'll note that whenever I say yogurt, I always do the plain yogurt. So primary, where they're born, okay, or where they mature. So they're all born in the bone marrow, white blood cells. B cells in the red bone marrow where they mature. Thymus, why they call them T cells. B for B cells for the bone marrow. And this is once they mature, a fancy word we'll get to an immune system is called naive. And they go to these areas for their first encounter to become active. Nodes, spleen, anywhere there's an opening, whether it's your gut, whether it's your skin, we have something called MALT. Mucosa, anytime there's lining tissue, it's called mucosa-associated lining tissue. You have SALT and GALT. Different, so they use the same acronyms that are associated. You can see some of the structures that are there. So it's very limited anatomically. The principal organs are certainly the lymph nodes. They're all over and they're clustered, particularly inguinal, axillary, and cervical. They all converge. There's that same illustration. They filter the lymph, get rid of unwanted substances, but the immune activation is critical. They're not big, less than an inch, tiny bean-shaped capsule, lots of that trabecular pattern like bone, those little nooks and crannies, so the lymph enters from multiple areas and goes through as an outer area, cortex, inner outer medulla. So the superficial area, lots of V cells. The deep one is T cells. We'll get to that. Again, activating both. And they extend inward, and you can see all the different cells that are there. The eventual plasma cells are what the B cells become once they're active, and their whole job is to make antibodies. Tons. And so there's lots and lots of those with reticular fibers, etc. And it's just a great illustration. Afferent incoming vessels, multiple, percolating through these structures and eventually exiting by these efferent vessels. So it's going to take some time to get through. Okay? Right? It's like you have the narrow opening for the filter and it takes a while to come through. It's like your coffee filter in the morning. For those of you who are, which I am. I had like 2 cups by 5:30 this morning.
5:30 a.m.
Of course. I get up. Well, I was dropping the dog off at CBW, Camp Bow Wow. And it opens at 6:30. I get him there at 6:35. It's a 12-hour day. He's very happy. Thankfully, he wasn't so happy and excited. He was ready to leave them a little entry surprise, as is his wont. And here are the little openings that are there, and you can see it's a good illustration. Afferent, sinus, that's fine. So we don't need to go into all the ins and outs, but the concave size or the hilum is for the efferent vessels. So more inflowing, less outgoing, flow stagnates. That's good here. Same illustration. And so I love this. An inflamed lymph node is the original term for what a particular disease known as the bubonic plague did. When that circulated through your bloodstream and eventually got into the lymph nodes, because that's an intracellular bacteria that notoriously causes them to fill with pus, and then they would become necrotic and they would blacken because they would die. And so you get these large, and it's hence the name the Black Plague. What made it spread even faster is when it got into the lung, when it broke through and got into the lungs and settled there, then it became what's called pneumonic plague. So it wasn't just bloodborne or being carried by some type of a vector like a flea bite. Okay, it was you were coughing and people were getting it. That really made it even more deadly. You didn't know that. So that's the origin of the word boo-boo.
No way.
It is. So boobos became boo-boos. And I always thought that it was Yogi's buddy. Oh, Yogi, don't take the picnic basket. Oh, hey, boo-boo. Oh, fool the ranger. Right? You remember him? From Jellystone Park?
I was left, yeah.
Jellystone. In the cartoons, it's Jellystone. No, the ranger's not going to be very happy with us, Yogi. Okay, so secondary cancer sites. Again, infections are more painful than cancers. It's not a given. It's just a little in the back of your mind going, painful nodes potentially are big problems. Look, when something's supposed to be infected and inflamed, at least you know what you're dealing with, and you can address that. Things that are hiding are a problem. So the spleen, not particularly large, but very easy to rupture. Largest of the lymphoid organs. Remember, from the anatomy, we have the splenic artery and the gastric artery and the hepatic artery all come off the celiac trunk. Okay, lymphocyte proliferation. It is a double duty. As white pulp, that's lymphatic, as red pulp, that filters out decaying and ready to be recycled red blood cells. That's the big deal. Big risk of the spleen, if you did not know, is blunt trauma. Okay, auto accidents. That was the worst thing in football when now we've got the blue tent and the concussions, but part of that stemmed from he had the wind knocked out of him. I can't even tell you how many times I've been watching TV football for 60 plus years. Oh, he'll be fine, just had the wind knocked out of him. Be careful. People can die. So if you like pro football talk on NBC, and if you watched the game last night, Chris Sims is on there. It's Phil Sims, fabulous quarterback. Chris was good. For Tampa, he got hit in the abdomen. By the time they figured it out, his spleen eruption, he nearly died. That's why he doesn't play in quarterback, or had a very short career at Tampa. If you didn't know that, that's one of the problems. So right over there, you've got to be careful with that. They're so rich with blood vessels. That's a really important point. So if you don't take my advice and you choose to have children or you have siblings, or for you people who are in sport, watch out for that blunt trauma. It doesn't have to be a helmet of some guy, a linebacker going at 250. Here it is. And red blood cells, and it does all that. Fetal erythrocyte, white and red pulp. White pulp is the immune. That's our part for now. Red pulp is blood cells, different things that are part of it. They give you an idea of the white versus the red. Here, very hard to tell. It's just filled with lymphocytes and reticular fibers. And so thin capsule, so it can rupture. So now we're seeing less splenectomies because for years they didn't. Now it's just okay if you can get the bleeding control. I remember a little girl who got hit by a motorcycle when I was a resident. And her spleen went. And you really lost her. I'm going to tell you, I was still in my first year of residency. So you don't know any better. So, and what happens, and splenectomies have been done for years. I had many patients with them from the Vietnam. They were Vietnam era vets who had spleens that had to be removed from trauma, from gunshot wounds, explosions, etc., like that. So I can see a little bit different, I operated on them because it's irregular blood test. Here's the malt nugget. That's there. These are the other parts: tonsils, Peyer's patches, and the very famous appendix. there's little, it's just like the lymph node, there's little clefts microscopically. Okay, so the tonsils, little rings, but they're exposed. So they really don't have a capsule per se. And there's all sorts of different ones. One's in the palate, okay, one in the pharynx. Those are the adenoids. So they're really a tonsil. They just have a different name associated with the tongue, opening for the eustachian tube, lots and lots of that. And so, and tonsils are relatively, again, we thought, I think I told you, you got two ear infections, boom, there went the tonsils. Now we tend to leave them. But I said, interestingly, my daughter had 2 sets of tubes. Eventually had her tonsils out when she's like 11 or 12. And my oldest, I think maybe it was 8 or 9. Middle one, though. But he can't help with the deck this weekend. He has to work. He's putting in a propane tank somewhere in Johnstown. I can't help him. I'd help him with that. So, and this is what they do. Not fully encapsulated, overlying epithelium invaginates, indentations. Their famous name is tonsillar crypts. And stuff gets stuck in there, and sometimes it's a problem. Okay? It allows immune cells to become activated in memory cells. So those little crypts. And so it's really, that's an actual illustration. So it's fascinating. Hires patches in the wall of the distal portion of the small intestine. So they're aggregates of lymphoid nodules, similar to tonsils, same deal. And so and you can start, they're starting to point to some of these little follicular areas down. And as you can see in the small intestine, we'll go into it in the next chapter we're doing. There are a lot of adaptations for surface area. Small intestine, your intestinal tract itself, the small intestine is about 20 feet long, and it's about, an inch or so, inch and a half wide. So if you took a hose, a garden hose, that was those dimensions roughly, and sliced it and put it flat, you'd have like an inch, inch and a half, 2 inches wide strip, 20 feet long. If you spread out all those adaptations, it'd be about the size of surface area of about a tennis court. So we have a lot, all the adaptation, all the folds and finger-like projections, if you all that surface, it's immense. It's immense. Tennis court. Oh. No pickleball. Sorry for you pickleball enthusiasts. Okay. And the appendix is off the start of the large intestine. You will see it comes from the first unit of the large intestine called the cecum. Large number of follicles like Peyer's patches. Okay, again, more memory. Again, the thought. And there's not a lot to say about the thymus. It's larger when we're born. And it's fairly large when we're born or even just prior to birth. It starts to shrink right away. Okay, so it's sort of in the mediastinal area under the sternum, overlying the heart, early in childhood, and then by adolescence atrophies. But it still makes the thymosins, the thymus, an endocrine organ to produce that. There, and we'll go more into what actually happens with regard to T cells. No follicles because it lacks B cells, does not directly fight antigens. It's all about maturation. Keeps immature T lymphocytes isolated so they don't become prematurely activated. It's a very becoming a T cell is tough. I mean, there's only about 2% of cells that potentially could be T cells become T cells. So there's a lot of programmed apoptosis that goes on because they have to be very, very specific immunologically. We'll get into that next term. And the stroma has epithelial cells, not reticular fibers, not a big deal. And so there's not a lot to say more than the fact it's quite large, but it's vestigial, literally, in us. And there's not, that's it. Hey, happy days. So that leaves me a 15-minute nugget to get you ready to talk more about GI and lab. And then we'll do the hard yes. Aren't you? You're all excited. See, I need a little more. Yeah, we're doing the gut.
Yeah. Hell yeah, we're doing the gut. Let's go. Woo!
It's my favorite topic.
Yeah, why?
Hey, if it doesn't eat you, eat it. Right?
Okay. Good.
What should I have for dinner tonight? It's just me and the dog.
Just you and the dog?
And the cats.
Well, what's the dog's favorite?
Anything I'm eating is his favorite. All I get is this big head on my leg. It's like, okay, I haven't eaten anything in like 1 second, maybe two. I'm very hungry. It's the worst thing you can give a dog is people food, and I'm horrible. But dogs are people food. Which brings us to the gastrointestinal or digestive system. There it is. Very straightforward what it does. Four major things: incoming, ingestion; processing, digestion; bringing it in, absorption. People often confuse digestion with absorption. When you're digesting, you're breaking it down. As you see, it happens both mechanically and chemically. Absorption is the actual bringing it into your system. Okay, and then excretion, getting rid of whatever you haven't used. Four basic activities. Understand that we can have problems in any one of those areas, frequently with digestion and particularly with absorption. But the analogy I use is like a spool of thread. I mean, basically, the alimentary canal is a hollow tube from your mouth to your anus that over time has twisted, turned, enlarged, shrunk, folded, increased all of these things for adaptations and increasing for surface area, like I mentioned to you, for particularly with the small intestine. But effectively, when I take a sip of this, it's not in, okay, until whatever's in there, and there's very little in a Fresca, that's absorbed. There's more harm than good. It's a chemical feast. That's what it is. Oh, my wife would kill me if I was drinking this. But
Do you think like eventually we'll get to the point since we have like the recorded database of how our like, one day or if you have like a different dimension?
I don't know. It would take such a long time.
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, it's so hard to predict. We learn more about it, and it's true. Like it's sort of like this. It's like it's artificial sweeteners, which is when they came, everybody went nuts. So we started off with we had cyclamates. I think saccharin was first, or cyclamates was first, then saccharin. Then we used whatever those ones that are from the family of the amines that were there, and now whatever's. I have no idea. I just goes nuts when you go to the store and it says real sugar. What is it? False sugar? Artificial sugar? Driving me crazy. But but the reality is, there is undoubtedly we will have changes in the gut. I think anybody could speak to that. But I think we're becoming a lot more oriented to it. I take a whole lot more natural stuff than I used to. Like I said, Chica, don't none of you tell her. You're gonna tell her. Oh, you're in trouble. Go ahead.
Did you like surgery on your intestines? And they were like checking your intestines for like nodules, like cancer or something. Did they take out all 20 feet and like?
Yeah, yes, in a way.
So like, do they just like put it back? Like,
Yes.
where would you put it?
Right back.
Okay.
Great story. All right. One of my. Are you ready for actually a good anecdote? Didn't I tell you this one? First of all, I'm an authority on stomach surgery, intestinal surgery. I've had 2 majors, 8 hours. So I've had on 2 occasions I've had half my stomach removed, and my duodenum is separated, and they did what's called a jejunostomy. In other words, to deal with ulcers. So I used to get ulcers, now I get. Better to give than receive. Well, Christmas is coming, so is Hanukkah. Always have Hanukkah. You gotta keep the and Hanukkah. You ever see those? We have our own song. Yeah. Rudolph the Reform Rabbi had a kid in dental school. What?
No,
Rudolph couldn't be a rabbi?
good.
Why not?
Seems a little busy in the holidays, so you can figure out.
Yeah.
But talk about how they took your intestines out.
No.
I thought that's what we were.
I thought, yeah, that was.
I know we were. So, and I'm not showing you. I have two very large incisions, one they used twice, from my xiphoid process to the umbilicus and below. So what happened was the first time, so I had this. So again, they cut off my stomach, and when they used to do bariatric surgery, they would cinch it so it wouldn't expand again. So that for people who just. And there's always been some problems associated. And so what they do is they basically bypass the area where the ulceration was after cutting it out, and together. I was born with an extra flap that only had about an 1/8 inch opening by the time I was about 35. So for 6 months, I was on just clear liquids. Right. So the first time I was doing an operation, this is part of the question. That we had a guy who was, I don't know, shot. So I'm doing, and it was the assistant chief of surgery and me. And all I'm doing is holding the track, like for 2 hours. And we bring the guy up because we're doing an exploratory lab to see what's wrong. And so the guy had a couple of nicks in the bowel, and we sewed them. And they checked the liver, there wasn't any damage. They checked the vena cava, there wasn't. We had one where the vena cava was torn. Somehow the guy survived. This wasn't the first gunshot wound for this guy, by the way. And so he fixed all the stuff, and he goes, "Okay, Lou, I'm going to look." This Dr. Chris, one of my mentors, goes, I'm going to run the bowel." Good for you. Go for it. I don't know what to say. So to answer your question, when you run the bowel, effectively, out came the bowel. Oh, this is my cord. It's mine. I wonder where it went to. Okay, and he did this. He's like, he pulled it out of the belly, and he's looking for little nicks, cuts, irregularities. When he finally got to the end, it was 12 minutes. The entire bowel, small intestine, was, here's the cut, here's the surgical field, was sitting out here. Now I'm looking at him. He must have seen my eyes were missing. So I said, and he said, "Oh, good, we're all set." And they do what's called a needle and sponge count to make sure you don't leave anything inside. They do a first count, and then then you say closing, then you go, okay, then you say your second count is correct. And I thought he would open him up and delicately put, just like that, like boom.
I think it would readjust itself.
It does.
Okay, yeah.
And we're going to get to that. That's because of something called the mesentery. The mesentery are strips of what are called visceral peritoneum that over time are the ones that supply the bowel. So the answer is, yeah, it's amazing how it sits right the way you would expect it in the middle. You don't have to, it just automatically, you must have, oh, don't worry, Lou, it's what we always do. Because I must have done this. Like behind the mask. What the fudge is he doing? So that's the fact I don't love what happened to me. It's a complicated system. There's a lot of anatomy and then there's a lot of physiology afterwards. But it underscores how there a lot of problems can be created. For years, everybody they mistakenly think that ulcers were caused by, oh, in micro you might have learned about this bacteria that did this, but no, it doesn't. It's a lot of misinformation. I never even tested positive for the bacteria, and I had massive ulcers. I had about a dozen when I first started. But for me, it was stress, living on painkillers, living on aspirin, ibuprofen. I didn't drink. I was a drinker. I smoked like a drinker. But I mean, if I had drunk as much as I smoked, I would be sure. But that's the honest truth with all of this. So I mean, this is one of those. Like I said, it's like wait, we've got digestive and hepatitis urinary, and I have bladder cancer. You're getting the whole picture.
How long do they like up and walk
Next day,
the next day?
you got to get up right away because the bowel can almost sometimes it can like telescope on itself. That's called intussusception. And the other thing is you can get where it's almost paralytic. So with all these surgeries, hip surgery, then you try to get people up as fast as possible. The only hard part is when I was afterwards, you have an NG tube, not pleasant at all. In your nose, down your throat, into your stomach, nasogastric tube. IVs, of course, and a catheter, unpleasant. And, all that stayed in there, and you're not getting, you can't do nothing by mouth. You're feeding you intravenously. And I go, when are you going to finally take this stuff out? He goes, when you poop. I said, you're not putting anything in. So how am I going to go? Not to be critical. I have a way of talking to doctors. It's like, what do you mean? I'm not going to be, you're not giving me anything to go with. He goes, and the reality is that feces, we all erroneously think that it's only undigested food. It's a third cells, because your gut lining cells shed every 3 days completely. You replace all of your gut cells every 3 to 6 days in billions daily. Water, 1/3 water, 1/3 cells, 1/3 undigested food. And so and finally, after about 5 to 7 days, the first go around, one was done at Presby, and then I had to have it revised, redone effectively 7 years later at St. Margaret's. And both those surgeries were 8 hours long. That's pretty scary. Yeah, that's pretty scary. Not for me. I was asleep. Again, whenever I have to have surgery, it's like, can I bring like my head? These days you could bring like your phone and and those things. Okay, but I always wanted to bring music and with like a little headset and plugged in. Because when they give you the goofy stuff, it's like I'm back in college. I have no idea. When I was asleep, I didn't remember anything other than getting up. And I'm one of those people who doesn't. I dream, but I don't recall my dreams. My wife recalls them all.